Thank you, everyone, for taking time to join us to celebrate Light Waves, an exhibition featuring photography and video-related artworks by UT Dallas alumni. And the artist talks this evening represent part of a larger group of talks held last spring in conjunction with the online version of the exhibition. And in that context, these talks are now being recorded, as I mentioned, and will be posted on the exhibition webpage with the others. There's 5 other artists that were recorded in March. The physical exhibition has now been installed in the gallery. Some of you have been able to see it, which is cool. And so we thank Dean Romer of the School of Arts and Humanities, Associate Dean of the Arts, Michelle Hanlon, Gallery Director Greg Metz, Gallery Manager Brian Scott, who's with us, Christy Barris, Events Director, who's also visiting with us. I want to thank everyone for all their support during this challenging, unusual time. And this evening, we'll begin with introductions and talks by 2 of our featured artists, Emily Loving and Tim Kolczak. And we'll start with Emily Loving's presentation. Then I'll introduce Tim Kolczak, and we'll proceed with his presentation. And we'll conclude with a question and answer period. So please enter your questions into the chat so we'll be able to continue our discussion with these amazing artists. So I'm going to start with Emily. Emily Loving is a Texas-based artist who's currently teaching here at the University of Texas at Dallas and also at Collin College. She works as a freelance lifestyle portrait and food photographer, and she's exhibited in solo shows and in collaboration with other artists in cities across the Texas and New York and across the US. She received her MFA in ATEC from UT Dallas, and her work has received acclaim at exhibitions such as one sponsored by the Houston Center Photography. And she's been included in exhibitions that you might have seen in Dallas, such as Vignette. That was fairly recent. And she's also curated exhibitions for the Bathhouse Cultural Center. So we're going to start with Emily Loving, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to her.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you, Brian. So I'm going to hope I'm doing this right. Okay. So everyone can see, yes. And 2 seconds. Good so far. Oops, nope, not like that. There we go, right?
Good.
I'm not getting a feedback. So I hope we're doing this.
Looks good.
Really good. Okay, it's good. Okay, great. Well, I kind of wanted to. This was one of them out of the exhibit, and kind of to show you guys how I don't know, my journey through photography. I guess I don't know. Just kind of my progression of my work, because I started out in a very different place. I started out pretty much working in this documentary sense. I always loved photography, even though that wasn't my first career path, but I always was drawn to it. And I think the storytelling aspect is what really drew me in initially, and that the power of photography and how you can just, how you use it to stop and take in a moment, or take in a bit of history, or take in a place, or something that for whatever reason has sparked your interest. But this single photograph was never really enough for me. The more and more I started taking pictures and documenting, and you know, that simple visual exploration of seeing something and photographing it, it wasn't enough, and I needed, kind of always felt like I needed something more. So I started playing around with triptychs and diptychs and more abstract form. And then actually it was pretty much in grad school. I had, you know, I'd seen Ed Ruscha and Dan Graham before, but I really dove further into them, and really got into the aha moment of what a photograph can do, and how it can be more than that simple documentation, or that simple story. So I began with cutting and rearranging and repurposing my photographs. So I would always take the photograph, but I would then get through there and cut it and rearrange it and kind of tear it up to kind of investigate and take control of the narrative, as well as kind of question my relationship to the photograph and my expectations of that photograph. And so I did this for a while, maybe. I had some control issues because I just couldn't get the full story I wanted from that single photograph. So I had to kind of pull it and do more. And then I went on and for a while I was really working with spaces and places. And I think I think it was me trying to figure out my place in my work, where that space was. So I really was taking these spaces and taking them out of context. And this is one of the only series that I worked with other photographs and my own. And again, just continually manipulating them and pulling them out and kind of taking them away from what they were originally to that story that I wanted to tell. And I also like the tactileness of them because I touch them, I play with them, I move them. So it's not just me seeing and grabbing from the world, but then I take that and I physically present that story or that picture that I want. But again, I'm always kind of questioning what is my relationship with this photograph, and what am I giving my viewer to have a relationship, and how that relationship will be with that photograph and those expectations as well. It's just funny to me because I'm a big Susan Sontag, if anyone else does, and she really talks about these ideas of how photographs produce evidence. She says photographs furnish evidence, but she also goes back further into talking about interpretation and how interpretation is much like for a painting. They open it up, and photographs do that same thing. She goes much more further into it, but the general ideas. And I think that was the thing that was always kind of, I wanted more of that interpretation than that sliver of that moment or that aspect that you just capture. And so that's what I try to do with these. Sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not, but that's what I'm attempting to do. And then I kind of moved into working more with people and less about the space and the place. I think I kind of feel like I maybe found my place. And so I went in and working with human form and female form, and also taking unconnected and unrelated things and putting them together and layering them in that sense to kind of forge a connection. And this is often a connection that I'm putting forth and presenting. It's not necessarily a direct connection. It's taking these, and with this way, I'm able to pack in other meaning and maybe plant little secrets or little stories within that. Color is a big thing with me, and I take a lot of consideration into the color and how I want to present it. I work a lot in pink. My work has always been, even way back when I had a professor one time, why is your work so feminine? I was like, I don't know how to take that and process that. And maybe ever since then, I've been working through that or commenting back to that. But I always usually have some feminine element to it. I mean, I kind of have a strong connection with that. So there could be that. But most recently, I've gone into doing, this is my Moving Mountains series. And to me, this work is also very physical. These were much larger and grander. There's physicality to it in her positioning and her posing. There's also a physical nature in the layering that takes place because, again, there's meaning packed into these. And with these, I took a little more of a direct approach as far as working with someone to pose. And then I pulled in other photographs that I had taken in different times and put them together. So there's also story and meaning packed into them all in different ways. You know, again, that overall meaning for me. And, you know, I mean, I'm hoping that I'm communicating something through here, but I also want the viewer to also be able to find their own story or their own meaning within them. So it's always, you know, and that's where that power of interpretation kind of lies. It's always, I always feel like it's such a loaded question when somebody like the meaning of my work, and I'm like, well, it's this and this, but I mean, that's not always. It's also important that the viewer is able to find some type of meaning in with it of their own, because they're bringing their own experience to it. So to the work in the show, again, I'm taking that femininity or that female form and have started working with it. And again, this is like I do with a lot of my work. It's photos from different places, so they're not always intended to be part of this series of work. These were again taken. Some were taken in studio, and others were taken at random times. And initially, they weren't intended to be together. You know, I'm just kind of a collector and hoarder of photographs. So I have countless images, whether they're on a hard drive or on my phone, or, you know, all these little collections of textures and light and color interactions and things like that. And I sometimes just keep them and think, okay, there's something here, but I'm not quite sure where it is yet. And then often they kind of, hopefully, they eventually find their way together. At least they have so far. So I hope that continues to work. I tend to really work on these aha moments. Like I start manipulating and cutting and ranging, and something may work and then something may not work. And then I'm like, okay, wait. And then I have this. And I feel like a lot of these photos that I take, they're my subconscious talking to me. You're working through this, or you're dealing through this. It will come at this other time. And so, so that's kind of, you know, again, I'm consistently working with the female form. It's, you know, I feel like right now, as with obscuring moving mountains, there were other meanings tucked into those, and as with this, there's some, you know, there's other meanings tucked into this, as far as you know, there it is. Women have a very deep connection to nature. There's a cultural feminism and a kind of this, as well as this violence towards nature, there's often a violence towards women. So it was kind of trying to pack these in, as well as, you know, there were so many questions. I feel like I've gone off on a tangent now, as far as, and I don't know about timing. How are we doing on time? Are we?
You have a couple more minutes just to kind of wrap it up, if you want to just have 10 minutes altogether.
Oh yeah, I wasn't quite sure, because I thought I had yeah, I had some times, but mainly I know a lot of you all were asking like where my ideas come from, and how my process is, and it mainly comes from basically my experiences, reacting to things that have affected my life, as well as current events. Again, the draw to me for photography was storytelling, and although I'm doing it in very different ways, I feel like I you know, with my work, I want to comment on things that have happened, or tell a story in a sense, and then as well as continue to question my relationship with the photograph, with that 2D flat image, and what I can get out of it. So I have answers to a lot of the questions. Should I save those, or do you want to go over them?
Emily, I think that would be great to for us to have Tim present, and then we
Okay.
can come back to exchange since we have a large number of questions, and a number of the people who posed those questions initially are
Okay.
here, and then that way we we can kind of keep moving along.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to. Tim, you are now the presenter.
Okay, sounds good. Emily, wonderful job. Thanks for showing us that. That was wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
All right, let me see here. Let me share my screen. And let's see. Everybody, we good? All right. Okay. The Veterans Project, empathy through.
Perfect.
Are we good? Okay. So I really wanted to talk about empathy. When I first started this project as my capstone work about 6 years ago, I remember feeling quite pigeonholed. like I, as a veteran of Iraq, I felt like I was being forced into a context of telling a veteran story because Marilyn came to me and said, Tim, I really think you should photograph veterans and tell their stories. I thought, is she saying that I'm not good enough to photograph anyone else? Like, do I just have to photograph veterans because I'm a veteran? Is that what I'm destined to do because she says I'm destined to do it? And the more I realized, Zoe, we did 4 projects for my capstone, and the power of those projects was so profound. And I was sitting down for a full day with some of these veterans, getting to know them, getting to spend time with them, photographing them. I was rediscovering my own community, and through that, learning a new sense of empathy. It was like I was rediscovering the people that I thought I knew, that I went to combat with, and I went overseas with. I'm rediscovering these people through an art form and discussing all these different questions and learning more and more about their walk and where they've come from in transition. So this is really a transitional essay. I can read this out here for you. The Veterans Project is a comprehensive photographic essay detailing the lives of World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, Desert Storm, global war on terrorism, combat veterans, and their return to civilian life. The project focuses on the many challenges surrounding the reentry into polite society and realistically depicts their lives profiled in both photographic and interview formats. The goal of the Veterans Project is to depict each participating veteran as they truly are, as a unique person whose decision to serve places them in a special category of American volunteers. What's interesting about that is I've actually taken that project overseas to England. We've also covered some Australian veterans as well, French Foreign Legion as well. So we made this an allied world project. Although all wear the same uniform and to some extent share a common bond as brothers in arms, sisters as well, these warriors see life in war through their own personal lenses. This image for me is profoundly powerful, and it's one of the images that you'll see in the gallery. Josue Barone came from East LA, was in his first firefight before he was even in the Marine Corps. He was part of gang violence. He had joined a gang as a young kid to kind of protect his own turf, protect his own block. He ends up joining the Marine Corps, and 2 weeks into his first combat tour, he loses his leg and loses his eye. You'll see in this image, that's actually the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, the Marine Corps symbol. Where his eye is. It's a glass form. And through this, he'd just gotten married. He was 18 years old. He'd just gotten married. And him and his wife now have 3 kids. They live in Temecula. But I can imagine the struggle that she went through in having to take care of this new husband of hers at 18, 19 years old. Now all of a sudden he's lost his leg and lost his eye. So you can imagine the sense of empathy that I develop in seeing my brothers like this and being able to photograph them and tell their stories. You see the demographics here. We're seen in about 121 countries. Our biggest viewership is traditionally men. We've got about 33,000 podcast subscribers now, which is pretty good because we just started the podcast about 6 months ago. This started off as a photographic essay, and for the last 6 years it's been that. But I really felt like delving into the storytelling, the audio was so important. It was so important to capture these veterans and hear their voices. This is Michael Rodriguez, who's he was the president of the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. He actually gave me this cross that I have around my neck. This is actually a piece of the World Trade Center. This is North Tower. He gave that to me as a reflection of art, and he built that himself from his art form and gave that back to me. He's actually in the book Portraits of Courage by George W. Bush. He's the president emeritus. He actually just retired due to a personal tragedy in his life. But Michael's eye, you can see right there, one of his eyes is glass. He actually had so many flash injuries and 10 deployments that that last IED that went off near his vehicle finally rendered him blind in that left eye. So Michael was a very good friend of mine, and I was very proud to tell his story. The black and white decision was actually it was a tough one for me. I felt like Marilyn and I talked about it very openly, but eventually it felt like the character and depth really portrayed through the portraiture comes out much better in black and white. There's less of a distraction. And with color, it really does bring in some distracting layers. So I think, overall, I've been very happy with the black and white decision. And the followers of the project have been too. We've got, I told you, a very big audience. And the followers are always talking about how much they love that return to black and white. It feels like something they've seen before. I think there's no power. This is a drive to light for me. Carter Chick, the man in this image, was my best friend and mentor from my unit. You see that's his daily prescription load. He was on about 85 pills a day at the time. And he was, I sat in a counseling session with him as a part of his project. He was one of my first 4 projects. And I sat in a counseling session with him. And, I've been since allowed to share this story, but I was hearing from his counselor when they were discussing his drinking habits. And he was talking about putting down 20 to 25 drinks a night on top of this prescription load. And his counselor flat out said to him, Carter, you're going to be dead in 5 years if you keep this up. Unfortunately, we lost Carter about 5 years ago. He killed himself, and that was a very powerful moment for me. It was a dark moment. I was struck by the tragedy, of course, because it was my best friend and my greatest mentor. He had done 5 deployments before our deployment. His first deployment was to Somalia back in '92, and then he did 4 deployments after. He had lost a lot of Marines and a lot of soldiers. He served in the Marine Corps before the Army. And I really wanted to get people to understand what pain and suffering truly looked like. So this image was very important to me. And you can kind of see now, if I could retake this image, I would, because the focus is off a little bit, right? You'll notice that. I think I shot this at like 2.2 or 2.8. Remember, Marilyn, we were talking about how I was learning as a photographer when I started this work. I really was. I just started photography when I started the Veterans Project at 25, 26 years old. So I was learning as I went. But honestly, I love it just the way it is now when I look at it, because I think the focus being kind of averted to the front and showing you what he was taking on, and kind of that back shadowing of him, the background being lost through those prescriptions, is very powerful. This ended up being what did it, and eventually the pain was too much to live with, and he did kill himself, and he left behind 2 kids and a wife, and that was a very dark time for me. But instead of getting too down in the dumps, I used that as a drive to light, and that is what the project has since become. Carter, I love this quote from him. The hardest part of being away from home is just that, not being there. I've missed everything. I got activated in 2004. It's now 2014 at the time of this project. I finally came home full time in 2013. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, baseball games, football games, stuff at school. I realized that, yeah, I'm their dad and Nikki's husband, but I wasn't there. So how good could I be? If you ask my youngest, who's 7, and he would tell you I've missed almost all of his life. I'm trying to make up for it now, but what's gone is gone. I can only move forward, and they can only move forward with the memories we make now. And obviously that pain lived on. He felt that And we had many discussions after that, and a year later he was gone. And I can only imagine what those background thoughts were as when he took his own life. But I know that he lived with a lot of pain. And so I thought to myself, if I didn't tell this story, if I didn't have this legacy to share with the world, what is that? I lose the memory of the man. I lose his combat experiences. I lose his reintegration stories. I lose everything about him that was powerful to me through his sharing of his life story. And so that's what it became. And then I decided to get into World War II veterans, and I told World War II stories as well. This project, this image is kind of what got us into Sundance. This was very important to me. This is Alfred Hawes. He was in the Bataan Death March. At the time of this picture, he was 101 years old. He actually died 3 weeks after I took this image. And I was able to stand there on the stage at Sundance and look at this beautiful image of him and be struck by the fact that he couldn't have cared less if he was there at that event. You know, it didn't mean anything to him. Just to return home with his life was a privilege. So he was in the Bataan Death March. He spent 1,181 days in a Japanese camp. His brother died in the camp. He starved to death, actually died in his arms. And Alfred, about 3 years into being at the camp, the bomb over Nagasaki went off and it blew him into a trench. And his arm broke in 26 places, and they sawed it off at the shoulder. He actually tied his own tourniquet with a belt around his arm to keep the bleeding down. And he somehow lived through that. They cut his arm off at the shoulder, and he became a one-armed wildland firefighter when he returned to the U.S. So, I mean, you want to talk about a profound, it was such a powerful story, more impactful than any. This man was a legend to me. And before I met him, there was only a quarter-page story in a now defunct Amarillo newspaper. So that's all that was out there on him, was this quarter-page story. And when we shared this story, it not only went viral, it had about 20 million views through various networks. And it was a massively impactful one for me. This is a friend of mine, Rudy Reyes, a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. He was actually in a show called Generation Kill that was on HBO. He became an Emmy Award winner after leaving the service. And I love that quote. He's such a powerful man. But I want to show you all these pictures and really get through here. Paul Merriman, World War II veteran. I could still remember the clicking on and off of the air conditioning when I was sitting in that room with him, and he's sharing this moment with me about his wife. He said, after 53 years of marriage, I began to notice that she was forgetting, and after some tests, I found out it was Alzheimer's, so I moved us to the forum. She declined over 5 years, and just as the worst began, she fell, broke a hip, and died within a month. It was a blessing for all of us. She'd forgotten me and the kids. In many ways, those years were harder than anything I experienced on Iwo Jima. You're talking about a man out of 144 Marines that hit that beach, and only 2 of those guys walked off the beach alive. The others were wounded or injured before their tour of duty ended. And then he talks about his wife and watching her lose her memory being the most powerful instance in his life. And so you can imagine the hell that he saw on those beaches, watching his friends being blown up on the right and the left of them. And then he's talking about his wife and spending those 60 some odd years with her, and then watching her memory decline is the most powerful moment. And I remember when I took this image, I saw that beautiful portrait of the two, which actually was black and white, behind them of their wedding day. And I said, Paul, I want you to look out the window and think about your wife and what she meant to you. And sometimes that's art, right? Discovering the essence of the person through asking a question. I want you to think about this. Can you think about that for me? And that within posing and portraiture is really what captures the emotion for me, is to be able to get them to go back there for a minute. And he sat there, and I said, all right, Paul, I took the picture. You can turn back towards me. And he said, no, son, I think I'll take this moment for me for a minute. He sat there for a good other 5 minutes, so staring out the window. He's thinking about his wife, and I thought that was just brutally powerful. I still get chills thinking about it, but 2 months later, Paul unfortunately passed away. And as you can see, these stories carry so much power for me, because I get to capture these guys sometimes in their dying days. You know, we've lost 8 or 9 of these veterans since I've told their stories, and these legacies live on. I mean, he had books of his project made and sent out to all his family members. And he was so proud of that. So it was pretty awesome to give that back to him. Kirstie Ennis, if any of you had been to the gallery before, one of my first shows, when the Spin Gallery just opened up, this was my first image that I presented. And, Kirstie is a good friend of mine. She actually won an ESPY last year through ESPN. She won the Pat Tillman Service Award. She's been on the cover of the ESPN The Body issue, and she is working on climbing all 7 peaks, and she'll be the first female amputee to accomplish that, which I believe she will definitely accomplish. I think she's done 6 up until now, so she's pretty powerful image. And the same thing, I had her stare out the window, and I wanted to get her to think about that experience of losing her leg. It was actually, she was on a helicopter, a Chinook, and the Chinook went down, it broke in half from about 2,000 feet up, and she managed to live, but she lost her leg. Her face was fractured in like 65 places. They had to pull off part of her jaw. They had to take her tibia, her leg bone, and recraft that and graft that into her jaw. So it's pretty amazing the progress she's made and the things she's doing. I just find this whole community so inspirational, not just because I'm a veteran, but because of the power of what they've gone through, and to stand up for that sacrifice, and then to come back here and to just do what they're doing is absolutely incredible. This is my first Australian veteran that I cover, Paul de Gelder. He's one of the hosts of Shark Week. He's a naval clearance diver in the Australian forces. He actually lost his leg when he was on a training dive out in the Sydney Bay. It was the first shark attack in almost 50 years. So he was training out there, and a 10-foot bull shark came up from under him and took his leg and his arm. About 10 years. His career included, before joining the military, he opened up for Snoop Dogg as a rapper in Brisbane. He's got a pretty incredible story. He lived out of his car for like 5 years. I mean, he was just trying to make it, and then he decided to join the military, and now he lives in LA, and he hosts Shark Week, and does a bunch of different stuff for Discovery Channel. Absolutely incredibly impactful individual. So what's next for the project? And I'll close it up with this. So mental health impact is huge for what we're doing. So we're joining forces with a partner in Heart Support, which is a mental health provider that's providing a lot of care to the human community overall. It's providing resources for people that need mental health interaction, help, resources. So for the Veterans Project, I didn't want this to just be an awareness project. I wanted to actually create action through the project. And so that's what it's become. We're teaming up with Heart Support on Veterans Day, and we're going to actually provide a real platform on the Veterans Project website where veterans can get 24/7 mental health assistance and help. So it's a lot more about just art for me. I think at its most powerful essence, and obviously this isn't going to be for everyone, but I think in its most powerful essence, art creates action. And we're creating an actionable process where people can actually receive mental help, because so many of these stories have such a massive impact on our community. And it's important that these veterans are able to share those stories, share their heart, and share what they've got coming up. So next project for us this will talk a little bit about the social impact that we've had, and I'll keep it short because I know my time is short. But we did a project on a Major Jim Capers who served in Vietnam. He was the first Black recon Marine. He served in Vietnam, and he discusses a lot of not only his time in Vietnam. He's up for the Medal of Honor for about the 8th time. Obviously, he was denied a few times by the Marine Corps due to racism and certain cultural biases in his service. On his last mission, he was shot 19 times. He broke both of his legs and his arms. He ruptured his spleen, and he stayed on the LZ 3 times while the landing zone, while the Marines would go up in the helicopter. He stayed back and continued to stay in the fight. So finally, that 3rd time, they got to him. And when they brought him back to the States, they brought him to the tarmac. And as he was laying there on the tarmac, wounded and injured, someone had jumped the fence and proceeded to urinate on him while he was laying there on the tarmac. And just the amount of struggle that he went through, and being a sharecropper's son, being essentially, in many ways a slave, and the way he was treated, and then growing up and then moving to Baltimore. His dad escaped a chain gang for a crime he didn't commit, moved to Baltimore, Major Capers moved out there with him and then joined the Marines. And still, after getting back from Vietnam, he was battlefield commissioned as an officer, which is extremely rare. It means you get your commission while you're in battle. So they actually turned him from a sergeant to an officer, to a lieutenant. When he comes back home, he still has to have people escort him into officers' clubs because they don't believe that he's an officer because he's Black. So the challenges that he faced in coming back were just absolutely incredible. We're telling his story, and we're actually able to provide a possible impact of helping him receive the Medal of Honor finally, rightfully so. We've got a couple senators on our side, and we're working really hard to get him this medal. So it's very important. Our social media channels are there, website, www.thevetsproject.com. Instagram is the Veterans Project, and then the podcast is the Veterans Project Podcast. Lastly, I'll say legacy, release through empathy. It's so important that we share when we have others speak their stories and tell their stories to us, that we really take the time to close our mouths and listen. I find that to be a declining value in society. I really want to see more people listen to stories, regardless of their veterans, nurses, social workers, whatever it is. Be a storyteller, create impact, create awareness, create action. And I really have found value in my life in this. I mean, Marilyn gave me the greatest gift when she helped me start this work. So thank you, Marilyn. And thank you so much to the class for listening to me ramble for a little while. I appreciate it.
It's really incredible work. And you've really captured the power of photography. I mean, they're just gorgeous.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You brought me to tears with that when he wanted to take 5 more minutes. That's just, but you could see it in his face and you know, the way you have him posed and the light and all that. It creates that very intimate moment. And I've never met him, but now I know I can connect and relate to him. So beautiful work.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's the greatest compliment I could be paid. So thank you.
Yeah, we kind of, in our exuberance in wanting to proceed, we kind of skipped over Tim's introduction, but he kind of filled in a lot of the gaps. So thanks, Tim. But a couple things. You mentioned you're the founder of the Veterans Project, the Caregiver Project, and the Veterans Project podcast. So that's quite an undertaking, starting all these different initiatives. And you have a BA in digital media communications from Southwestern Assemblies of God University, and you received your master's at UT Dallas in emerging media and communications. So, and then during the process of working on completing your undergrad degree, that's when you were deployed to Iraq for 9 months. So that's kind of quite an undertaking. And you mentioned Sundance Film Festival, but your work's also been published in PTSD Journal Magazine, USA Today, the Houston Chronicle, and numerous other publications. So we're so excited to hear all those wonderful things that have been happening that you're able to, I think it's challenging. And I think there were a lot of questions from the students regarding trying to pursue your passion. And let's see, I've shared with you some of those questions. One of some of you have started, since we're kind of a little bit working with, trying to achieve goals. One of the questions was making that transition. I think that was a good question about, this is Tara's question, making the transition from us, being a student and then working professionally, and whether you had some advice. I think, Tim, you shared some of your insights, but if you had some other kinds of suggestions or advice for students or anyone who's thinking about trying to pursue, a creative field where we know it's very competitive, and we know that there are opportunities, but one has to pursue them. They don't necessarily show up on your front porch. Someone doesn't knock on your front door and go, "I'm looking for you." So,
ask my bank account when I started this if it just showed up at my front door. It did not. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to answer that. For me, it was just first of all, don't do it. Just kidding.
Yeah.
For me, like the pursuit of the work really within when I started this was just throwing all caution to the wind, believing in it 100%, and really just going with the passion. I was willing to do whatever it took to go after these stories. So I would go on 3-4 day road trips to Los Angeles to meet veterans who I'd never met before and spend 3 or 4 days with them. And I slept in my car all along the way, 100-degree heat at nighttime in West Texas truck stops, sleeping in the back of my car. And my parents, meanwhile, thought I lost my mind because I just got my master's degree. And they're like, what is this guy doing? So for me, like the ability to just invest in your work, it's easy to say, don't worry about your bank account. I still had bills, but I put a lot of that money back into the project. And I'm still doing that 6 years in, So I think with undying passion comes undying fervor to pursue that art. And so you'll figure it out. You'll find a way to do it. But really monetizing this was actually very difficult. I had to take sponsorships. We had to pursue companies once the project got to a certain size, social media wise. And that's what emerging media master's degree really helped me with, was really pursue that through social media, reach out to different companies that wanted to tell veteran stories. And usually by the time I sat down with the owner, they were like, Tim, we loved your work, but how much are you asking? What are you asking to sponsor? And then them saying, well, you already have that. So, or turning it down and saying, we just don't have the money for that. That's not something we're interested in pursuing. Not being afraid to hear no is a huge part, because you're going to be told no. You can be told no 99% of the time and be one of the most successful artists on the planet. So I think that realizing that no can bring a gateway to something else or another opportunity is a massive thing. I mean, when people say no to me nowadays, I don't really even hear no. I just hear, well, maybe there's another opportunity down the line. But rejection is very hard when you start. So just undying pursuit, passion for the work, and chasing it down, not being afraid to sleep in that West Texas truck stop in the back of your car. I wouldn't suggest that to everybody, but for me, it was okay. So just for me, it's an undying passion. I love it to death. You can see the weight of the work with the, losses I've experienced through suicide and the men that I've lost. So for me, their memory dies out to me if I don't keep pursuing it.
Cool. I appreciate your comments about how your connections with your subject adds another level of urgency. A number of our veterans from World War II are passing away. So there is, or there's other factors that impact the availability of some of the your subjects. I was kind of curious, how are you navigating COVID? How are you? Is that something that do you feel like you're not as busy, not as actively photographing as you are normally? Or I was just curious.
Yeah, there's been precautions taken, obviously. A lot of times, since it is a one-on-one setting with these veterans, it's actually, you take a lot more precautions to be safer about it. But I'm not really covering any of the older veterans during this time.
Okay.
That's kind of the precaution that I really wanted to take. Some of the younger guys, yeah, we're still going forward with projects. We're just being very safe in how we attack the work. So, but it is an awkward time for everybody. I think it is strange. So traveling, I have to take, every state's rules are different, and like, obviously I travel the country and the world. So the world right now is not an option, but everywhere. So it's one of those things where I'm still taking a chance with it, and I make sure that the veteran is fully aware of that before I go out there and I do these projects, and they're usually all for it. A lot of us have experienced a lot of danger in our lives. So I think we're kind of gluttons for punishment in a lot of ways. But yeah, so I've been taking precaution, but still going out on some trips, just with the younger veterans.
Okay, cool. So that's great. Emily, did you want to kind of comment from your perspective how you're dealing with the that idea of the transition? You know,
The transition was hard. I mean, it was hard. It was there was this moment you're like, oh, wait a minute, like I'm supposed to be doing something and doing more. And I lucked out because I was in a collective while at UTD, and it kind of fell out after that. I mean, we worked a little bit, but we disbanded at some point. But it was nice to have that community. So I guess my words of advice is like following type, keep working, just work, and treat your art like a job, like a business. Make time for it if you have to earn your money in other capacities, but continue to carve out time and as art, you feel like, oh, I should wait until it comes to me or whatever. But if you don't discipline yourself, life will take over. So you have to be disciplined with your art practice and treat it like a job. And then the other thing is for me, one of the things I really missed about, somebody had said, what do you do when you don't have all the prompts and the assignments? I mean, that was one thing. But more was the critiques and the community and the interaction that I really missed. And so form some kind of community. Luckily, me and some of my collective friends, we were like, we miss a critique. So we would, back when Central Track was around, we would take off nights and we would kind of meet, talk about things we had read or show work that we were working on. And because you need that. You need that community once you leave. So keep those connections for sure. And then, much like what Tim was saying, I would just keep working and stay true to your work. It's really easy because like he was saying, you're going to used to hearing no. I wish I had all the rejection letters that, that I've gotten, all the rejection emails, and there's one. In fact, sometimes when I get accepted, I'm like, I have to read it twice because I'm assuming I got rejected. And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, I didn't. But it's just like he was saying, but you stay true to your work and don't try to meld it because it'll come. You just have to, like he was saying, you just have to keep, okay, you say, no, I'm going to go to somebody else. Or maybe sometime later it'll open up. Because usually those rejections are less about your actual work and what's happening in the show or what's happening in this or that. There's so much more behind it that it's not necessarily a direct reflection of your work specifically. So just get used to know.
I like that.
Well, yeah, that's encouraging.
Is it not? You're not alone. You're not alone with it.
You're not alone.
We were at the some of us were able to go to the gallery the other night, and there was a young student assistant who was in the gallery, and he mentioned the same thing about rejection, but he's a younger. He's very young, so I think it's good to hear various people say this, echo the same concern that, you have to, there's a certain point where I think constructive criticism is really helpful, but it's important to realize that a lot of jurors have a certain taste, and there can be a lot of competition, and it's really hard to know why your work was included. Maybe they already, they had enough entries and they were exhausted, or who knows.
You never know.
You don't know.
Criticism is always good to take and evaluate, and then, continue to grow. But you don't know. At least that's what I tell myself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if we got dejected and, took every rejection seriously, then we would stop working and we would all be pretty irritating people to live with because you're not making your work, you're not going to be happy. I mean, that's kind of what drives you at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's at the core of it.
Yeah. Another good question was from Anne Marie. who said, with varying just degrees of experience in the art world, how important or necessary do you think sharing a written narrative is when exhibiting your artwork?
I think it's really important. And Tim and I have very different approaches to the work, and I think his stories really fit tightly with the photos because it gives you another depth. But and mine are in much more abstract sense comparatively. But I like to give that guidance as far as what it is. I may not directly tell you, or as directly as the stories tied in with Tim's work, but I feel like having some kind of because for me, and I'm not trying to speak for, but for me, it's that narrative, and that's why I do photography. My narrative looks a little different, but it's that ultimately I'm telling a story through my work.
I mean, for me,
go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
No, I think for me, I think it's actually more common in the art world that you see, and Emily, your work is very uncommon, which is cool. But I think it's actually more common that the work is abstract and kind of allows the viewer to develop their own sense of meaning. So I think as a written piece, this is actually what I'm doing is a little bit more rare, I guess, because I'm explaining to people what they, in a sense, should think about the image, and it's not me explaining it; it's the person themselves in the end.
Mm-hmm.
The narrative for me and the connection of the image and finding the emotional connection within the words is such a powerful thing. So, as you saw in that image with Paul Merriman, where he's staring out, you could tell that he wasn't turning no matter what. He was not going to turn back to me. He wanted to be there. He wanted to stay there. And he expressed as much to me. He said, "No, Tim, you're not getting this time. This time is me and my wife, and I want to think about her right now. This is my internal conversation I'm having with her." And so you couldn't get him to turn back, and you see that in the quote where he's talking about his wife. And that was the photo that we actually used in gallery with that quote. Was because the power of that moment for him. I know that he was thinking of the tragedy, but ultimately he was thinking about what a wonderful life he had with her. So being able to take that essay, that narrative, and you can see that image of Carter with all the pill bottles in front, and then you experience a layer of emotion that is so profound, it's so strong that you go, it's right there. It's missing 8 years of his kid's life and the internal toll that took on him. And you get another layer of emotion on top of that one that's already there in the image. So double layering those emotions through word and through image, I think is a very powerful thing for the project. It's something that I think about in everything that I do. And these interviews have certainly taken a different turn now that it's a podcast where I'm developing my transcript off of moment of the podcast, speaking. It's as simple as taking the picture when sometimes you'll take the picture when they're tearing up and they're talking about losing someone. The moment and not taking that picture, letting them speak through to the other side of that moment and finding the emotion on the bottom half of that. So for me, it's really about feeling the moment out and connecting those images through those words. And I think I more than answered that. It's a very powerful thing for those words to connect for me.
Anne Marie had asked us, about do we develop the narrative before or as a story? And I mean, I think you just nailed that. Like, and I don't do the narrative before. I may have an idea, and then as I'm in the work, much like you do, like you were just saying, like a narrative, I let the work kind of take me to places too. Like I have the idea and I know what I want to do, but oftentimes I find that it expands, or sometimes it says or and so like you were saying, it's you should be in the moment of it if
let me
it's working.
Let me speak on that point. Actually, it's not that. It's actually the photography often begins before the narrative starts.
Mhm.
So very often I'm photographing these guys for 2-3 days before I even ask them a single question about their lives. And then it's just conversational. I'm there with these guys sharing time because obviously brothers and sisters, we both went overseas, we both served. So which is it's a strange feeling. But the image is actually, I kind of let them become what they become as the day goes by. So just spending a natural day in the life, kind of a fly on the wall. But that narrative takes, I don't develop my ideas of meaning before I take the shots. I kind of let that develop the idea for me.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because on one hand we have the artist statement of the statement that may be available in the gallery or it's available online. It's available to the curator or to the press, or it's on the website that presents the entire body of work. And then, Tim, you're also talking about text as an integral part of the work that has it's the text of the subject, the subject speaking. And as you mentioned, the podcast is really exciting because you're expanding on that. And it'll be interesting to see the that continued exploration of working with language, whether it's audio, whether it's the printed text, and seeing how that helps viewers understand the complex story that you're trying to share. Very cool.
There's a question that came in. Did anybody see that on the chat?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good one. That's Christy Barris.
Okay.
Yeah. So, are there any moments you felt were too intimate or personal to capture? That's a good question.
Yes, actually, my first one of the first projects that I did slightly after the capstone projects, Maryland, was Kirstie Ennis on the picture that you saw of her sitting on the couch. She was in her room, and I was sitting next to her, and she was removing her leg. And I was like, I just sat there and kind of stared for a second. I mean, worst thing to ever do, right? I'm a veteran, I should know this. But I'm sitting there and I'm staring, and I'm like, and I kind of looked at her and I was like, she's like, you can take a picture, and I said, no, I kind of just want to let this carry out the way that it is. It felt like a sense of respect and reverence there, and the sacrifice that she had experienced. It's not always that way. I photographed guys removing their leg, but for some reason in that moment, it felt too personal for me to photograph. And that's a strange thing, that for one moment you can take exactly that image and photograph it, them removing their leg or an appendage or something like that, and it's not too intimate. And then at other times it feels that way. And that was weird. I don't know why it developed that way, but I think it was because it was my first time seeing that and really gathering the essence of that sacrifice. Because I didn't have any buddies from my unit that lost limbs. So it was me experiencing that first time up close and personal. It definitely was pretty tough. But later we had her replicate that moment, I think the next day, and then I was able to photograph it. But that first time, it was I don't know, something too powerful to really even pull. I have to tell myself to bring the camera up to my face sometimes when I'm in the middle of something, because I get so caught up that my internal shutter is going off, but my external, my hand's down by my side with the camera, and I'm like, I better pull it up and take this picture. But my internal shutter is taking the picture and remembering the moment. But sometimes having to tell myself to pull the camera up to my face it's tough.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think we have Emily, I think there were some questions, and this kind of came up too when we were sharing some of your work in the gallery with like in terms of your use of the sometimes you're using the different elements, like the one with the cutouts. You had the neon color, and sometimes it's painterly, and the fragmentation, and let's see, I think there was one in the second group here. Yeah, there were a number of questions. Kind of the disruption, how you kind of, because a lot of times when people are using Photoshop, they use it. So we can maybe shift for a few minutes on technique here. I know there's questions about lighting, but there's some Photoshop questions. So oftentimes you kind of work with a kind of, it seems like almost a cut and paste. And
I do both. I've worked,
yeah,
sometimes I physically cut them, sometimes I do Photoshop. Moving mountains, I had to do Photoshop just because there was a blending element to some of them. I wanted them to merge together. With this body work, I didn't want them to merge together because I wanted that clash to be there. I wanted the kind of the juxtaposition or the at odds of the two, the nature and form to be there. But I also like for you to know that the cut has been made. That it's I'm not out to make a composite or trick you. I want you more to question the nature of or the expectation of the photograph, or at least that's what I'm doing for myself, because I want my presence to be there as far as that cutting. And with this series, I made it much more jagged, and intentionally, as almost like a violent disruption to it. Sometimes, like in Moving Mountains again, it was smoother cuts, but this one it was more to be that aggressiveness almost, or that jaggedness, I guess, is I wanted to communicate.
okay, yeah, and so do you use that kind of airbrush technique, like the painterly airbrush type of technique? Is that like a strategy to kind of balance the harshness of the kind of cut and
Yeah,
paste?
usually because of the like in the recent series, the color or the paint added was Photoshop.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so there's a smoothness to that, whereas there's that there's that kind of jagged cut with the others. So I float back and forth.
Yeah, cool. So Alicia, Tim, although Emily can respond too, I think students might have a lot of questions about lighting. Both of you work with documenting the figure, which is kind of interesting since you explore it in completely different ways. But obviously, when you're working with human form frequently, you have to be aware of how light is describing the figure, how it's illuminating the face. And are there any, Alicia asked the question, what kinds of tools and methods do you employ to achieve the lighting that you want?
For me, with black and white, I'm thinking a lot more about texture than I am lighting necessarily. So, like for background, texture is a lot more important to me. That's the interesting thing about black and white is I usually see an image in black and white before I take a shot. So something that didn't start out that way, I'll notice images where I go back to old projects and I go, ooh, that doesn't make a great black and white image. The early assumption of black and white as a model, I didn't really understand it. I just thought, oh, black and white, that's easier because, you don't have to really gain much of a context there. But it's harder in different ways. It's harder in textures. It's harder in backgrounds. You have to be very conscious of things that you don't normally have to be conscious with color. So lighting and harshness and shadow, I actually want to invite some of those elements into my photographs with the veterans. I don't necessarily, whereas when I was photographing weddings a lot, I wanted the light behind the bride just perfectly cast through her veil, in a crescendo across the lawn in front of her. I wanted all the essence of the moments and the light and the color and everything to just add up perfectly. But with black and white, I'm really much more interested in shadows and harsh contrast and in the depth there. So it's taking your mind and kind of rewrapping it in a different way and thinking differently. And I'm sure Marilyn can attest to this and the black and white images that she's taken before. You have to really rewrap your mind and in your mental frame around what that context is and realize that all of the things about that are outside of the profile of the person are going to fall away, but all the things within the frame of that person are going to come into precision, and everyone's going to see everything in very directness. So your images and focal point, your focal points have to be really on, and because people will notice much more so with black and white, I think, than color. And I've noticed that. So for me, it's about contrast, background, texture. Those are the most important elements of black and white. And lighting is an issue, but it's an issue in a different way.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate your comment about that interest in or an ability to work with contrast given the subject matter and different from other kinds of situations that you found yourself in. And certainly just briefly on shooting and with the idea that the image ultimately is going to be black and white, sometimes you have to remember certain colors are dark and certain colors are light. And we have more ability than ever before in Photoshop to play with value, which, you know, are when we edit our raw files and stuff. But it is true that sometimes color, because you read a color image in such a way that the color can be a catalyst or a trigger for the image. What might be beautiful in color doesn't work in black and white. And so I'm sure that that was kind of a learning experience for you of making that transition. You mentioned some of the early ones you weren't as happy with them. So,
No,
yeah.
definitely not.
That's interesting. Emily, did you want to talk about lighting?
Lighting. I mean, you know, like I tell my students, if you don't have light, you don't have a photograph. Photography is writing with light. As much as we want to make it into all these other, like, you know, this looks great visually, you know, I mean, it is form and content as well, but you know, at the basis of it, you need light. So and it sets the tone, and you know, Photoshop is great, but sometimes it's just coming from experience. When you snap a quick photo and you don't have the right light and you get it back and you try to recover it, you're like, oh, you know, I mean, it happens. And you just like, it's such a great photo, but if you don't have the light, you don't really get any of it. But for me, with my work, it's the light is setting the tone. And I play on studio artificial light and natural light, again putting those oddities together, because with all the form and the function, there's, except for obscuring was primarily natural light, but I work in the studio and then also with natural light. So
seems like your studio work has a lot of very soft light, like you're using soft boxes and
yeah, that's just I prefer the natural light look. I do have some stuff that I've done that is more contrasty and hard and whatnot, but that's my commercial work tends to lean that way too. I guess it's just, you know, it's just what I'm drawn to. I worked with many a photographer who likes strong contrasty, so I guess maybe that moody, dramatic, and it does have a place, and sometimes that's the tone that needs to be set, especially like with black and white. I think so, you know, I think so too. The textures and contrasts are really important. So
you in terms of working with combining image, you made a good point about how some of the images are shot, like the landscape shot with natural light and then the figure shot in the studio. And so sometimes there can be a little tension between the quality of the light sources, and although sometimes that can be distracting, it seems to be you know, you're already playing off of contrast. The images are dynamic anyway, so whereas in a seamless composite, you might not want to have that variation. In
Right.
yours, you're kind of pushing contrast. And so we'll notice like the grass is contrasty, but the shoes they're described, or the legs described in really soft light. So there's something, they do exist in different worlds. And so so that's kind of fascinating about the light, working with the light. Cool. Good. So did anyone want to take on the big question from Anna about what steps do you take as a photographer to reach a larger audience?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it on. Wow. Well, let's just say my master's in social media really it helped. Emerging media and communication, having my master's in that definitely helped. It was kind of a natural progression, though. Marilyn made a real point of getting into a niche with my photography and my work. And like I said, at first I felt like I was pigeonholed and probably was a little offended by that. But the funny thing is it gave me my greatest gift in that I was able to tell stories in a niche. And I think it's so important as a photographer to find that. I thought to myself, I want to photograph everything. Why do I have to be in one niche? Why can't I just shoot landscapes when I want to shoot landscapes, architecture when I want to shoot architecture? But when you're able to really focus that passion in one area, I think it really brings out the best elements of your work. And so for me, being able to photograph the emotional elements of these veterans and getting to tell their stories, and now with the families who've lost their veterans overseas with the Caregiver Project, it's important that we tell those stories and we discuss those narratives in honest and truthful ways. But really, because of that niche, the project is progressionally growing to, now where if I go down the street and I'm speaking with a veteran about it, they'll know my work. They're like, "Oh, you're the black and white guy. You're the guy who takes the black and whites." I've had times where I've been talking in a class in context and someone says, "How are you associated with the Veterans Project?" And then somebody else in the class says, "He is the Veterans Project." and they're like, and down the road, I think just naturally niche. I mean, it is a very exclusive community. So the project is progressionally is growing. Let's be honest, veterans are a lot more popular than they were, let's say, Vietnam era. So nowadays, as far as the way that we're having the population, we're very popular. So, it's a favorable conditions for me. I don't know if it'll always be that way, but just being able to put that out on social media and doing a Instagram, and I share a photo and quote. The way I break it down is I do a full blog, first of all. So there's an entire blog on that veteran. And then each day I post one photo and one quote on the Instagram. Started out with like 10 questions. Now it's like 35 to 40 questions. It's going to turn into a book soon, probably. It's something that's getting more and more. It's becoming more and more of a narrative of that person's overall of telling story every day. Sharing a different part of that person's life in context is very important. Because, if you share one quote on a person's life and that's all the context you gather, then that's kind of how you think of that person. And so for me to be able to share all these different quotes and images, that's become a big part of it. And then obviously starting the podcast 6 months ago has been huge for our growth. Like I said, we're, in 121. So social media is huge, as much as a lot of people don't like it. And I know a lot of artists that hate social media. Trust me, a lot of photographers that hate it, and they'll complain to me because they've seen that my work's growing. It's like, "Oh, you must feel great with all those followers." And I say, well, not really. It's just natural to the progression. If I want my message to be heard by more of an audience, and I want our veterans' stories to be shared, don't I want this audience? Don't I want this story to be something where we're having conversations about it at our kitchen table? Getting that way is now possible through social media. So I want to share that as much as possible. And for those that don't want to do that, that's fine. But realizing that I've, at the end of the day, got to make money and I have to eat, like being able to have a big social media following has definitely helped the project a lot. So just not being afraid to put your work out there and inviting honest conversations about it is huge.
That's cool. Thanks, Tim. Thank you for sharing some of your insights about finding a way to pursue your passion and also, foster dialogue. And it's just interesting that we do have social media, and it does give you a platform and an opportunity for that exchange. And I think that that's what I think we all struggle with it a little bit. It's like, okay, here's this incredible opportunity to distribute my images. How am I going to navigate it? What's going to work for me? And I think that that's a question that everyone, and I'm so glad that that it's working for you in this context at the present. That's fantastic. Yeah. So, Emily, I know you're on social media a lot. So, did you want to talk a little bit about how you've been active? And you mentioned working in an artist collective, and
It's it's a great tool. It's a really powerful tool to have. And you reach audiences that you couldn't typically reach if you're in Dallas and you know and it's a very powerful tool. We used it a lot in the collective to gain support and to not local support as well as get other notoriety. And I use it. I have a Instagram account. For commercial work, I have my own Instagram account. So sometimes it gets to be a lot, and sometimes you do want to divide them up. But I find it powerful, and I've also been able to connect with other artists, and which is really powerful too, because you can be exposed to and meet other artists that you normally wouldn't. So I know I hear people say, well, I don't want to put it out because I don't want it, or it'll get stolen, or it'll get but it just seems, just put it out. I mean, that's why or put it out if you're ready. You have to, everybody has their own process, but I find it to be a positive tool.
Definitely, and I don't want to dictate to anybody their process or the way that they do things within the work. But for me, if you really want to turn this into a business as your passion and you want to have it evolve into something special, what better day than nowadays and the technological standards that we're living with nowadays, and being able to share your project to a greater audience. I mean, it's a really powerful tool that you can utilize for your work. You don't have to. And I understand the purity of artwork, and I mean, I've got friends that have like, man, I just don't want any followers. I just want to put my work out there. And it's like, yeah, but you haven't been able to, you haven't been able to quit your day job at Dairy Queen, and you've wanted to do your own thing and get out there into the world. Not that there's anything wrong with working at Dairy Queen, but you've wanted to get out there into the world and showcase this beautiful artwork. And you're stuck in this day job that's 9 to 5. I think you should be trying to escape that if that's really what you want to do, If you want to pursue that passion, do it. I think so. Yeah.
I totally agree. Get it out there. But if you do have hesitation and you're making work and you have hesitation with it, then do something on the side, or do something that correlates with that work that you're not ready to share, or you want to reserve for gallery, and promote that. If you're not going to promote your work directly, at least promote you as an artist. You do need to have some standing on social media, I think. I mean, just do it in some way, because it's just so powerful, and people, you're going to have that book probably sooner than later, because you've grown this mass on social media instead of having to go out, knock on doors physically, and other artists and stuff. You get discovered and people recognize you. And so, yeah, do it in some capacity, I suggest.
I mean, if it wasn't for social media for the Veterans Project, I would not be able to live this as a full-time job. It just wouldn't happen. So for me to be able to have this platform on Instagram, and naturally it becomes the other constant of, you still need to show your work in gallery. You still need that physical interaction. That's so important, because sometimes I'll get so distracted by my social media channels that I'll get an invite to a gallery or something, and be like, was that going to benefit the work? It's not really about that. It's about benefiting your own art form and like your discovery of that art form. So like getting to spend that time with viewers in the context that we did, like at the first gallery, Marilyn, you remember, that was very powerful for me to stand there. It was very powerful for me at Sundance to recognize and to be able to speak with people about it. But social media allows for some of those conversations. So I think that's a really powerful part. And I know we wouldn't have, I don't know that, there wouldn't be that recognition without social media. People wouldn't walk up to me and be like, I know the Veterans Project, because I don't know how else I would have had that conversation. It's just a very powerful way for me to share it. So social media is huge for me.
These are good points, especially now we're in this holding pattern for another year, probably. And this is a good time. I guess we always have to look at this for the silver lining. And one thing that we can do is figure out ways to use social media or the internet to connect. And as you mentioned, exchange with other artists. And I know I just attended some sessions sponsored by the Society of Photographic Education. They just had an online conference, which was an experience. I think it's my first online conference, but it's kind of similar to what we're doing here, similar kind of exchange, and just gave artists an opportunity to promote what they're doing and to exchange ideas and to meet one another, become familiar. I was able to become familiar with some artists I didn't know of before. And I think that right now we're all in the same kind of situation that we do want to kind of connect up with what's going on, what new work is being created. And right now, most of what we're going to experience is virtual. So if like I said, Tim was and Emily was saying, maybe you're not ready to share your work with a wider audience. Now's a good time to reflect on what strategies you might want to adopt and to begin to prepare some work and to think about the different potential avenues. Emily, as you said, you have some of your social media sites are more commercial photography, some are more the fine art photography, so that you can think about how you're trying to attract attention to your work, but not necessarily kind of gives you the flexibility to pursue those different avenues separately. And so that's an interesting strategy, just in terms of.
And I know some artists also will use social media to test out new work or to test out ideas that they're not fully committing to yet. So, it could be a good tool in that way to not even, to see how this is, what kind of response am I getting for this? Or how is this looking when I put it out there versus sit here with it?
Sure. That's really, I appreciate all your insights. Let's see, I think maybe we just have a couple more questions. For Tim, there's one question. You somewhat answered it. How would you, this is a technical question, how would you recommend setting up for a shoot with someone so that they would be the most natural and comfortable when dealing with such serious topics? This is from Carissa.
That's a great question, Carissa. For me, because it is my community and I'm comfortable within this now, it's something to where, honestly, a lot of guys are very excited about being part of the Veterans Project. So it's often working past their nerves in a lot of ways and showing them that I'm indeed not that cool. So, so being able to be in that, format with them is very powerful. Just spending the day with them and making it not about the questions. And very early on in the project, when nobody knew what it was, and that first veteran was asking me, like, why do you want to follow me around for? I don't know if you remember that one of those first projects, Marilyn, but it was my buddy. He was installing his wood floors in his house. And he'd just gotten back from Afghanistan. And I'm photographing him as he's putting in wood floors around the house, which just seems like the most natural benign activity, right? But it became this very powerful project because the questions coupled with seeing his family around him and his little girl and him putting in these wood floors and carrying out day-to-day duties while answering really tough questions. So every 4 or 5 hours up front, not doing that at all and just hanging out with them. And I don't take a first picture sometimes. If I know I've got like a week with the veteran, I won't take a picture the whole first day. And then in that long extended format has really helped me out as a photographer a lot because you develop a lot of those natural movements. Whereas if you're going into a studio, obviously you're like, all right, we got 1 hour, we got one shot to do it right, and we got to get these shots in the proper context and light. I'm able to take the full day, and so I'm able to take those 3-4 hours up front and not take a shot and just genuinely show interest and empathy, right? We talk about the power of empathy in storytelling all the time. Carrying through into, then all of a sudden I'm pulling my camera up for a shot or two, and the veteran doesn't even notice it by then. And then all of a sudden, that becomes a part of the natural movement of the day. They're used to the shutter going off as the day goes on, and then those periods come out, and then people will ask me, how do you get that emotion? Well, it's easy. It's those first 3-4 hours spending it up front with them and getting to know them, and then after that, it kind of takes over for itself.
Cool. Since we're kind of, I think we're close to our last question for the evening, but Emily, since we're kind of talking about interacting with our subject, did you want to talk a little bit about, your models or your subjects and how you work with them?
Well, that's so, for one of the series, it was much more directed. For the other one, it was much more up to the models themselves to be natural. So it just kind of, it kind of changes. And in all honesty, the models that I frequently, not always use, but some of the models I frequently use are friends of mine who were in the collective. So we've been studio mates, and we've collaborated on a lot of different art pieces. So we have a natural relationship together, so it's easy to work with. However, just with commercial work and with other things, I've worked with people and had to instruct in certain ways, or I've never, or try to get them to be comfortable to feel at ease in front of the camera, but not in an artificial way. So, and sometimes I nail it, and sometimes I just, it's kind of that rapport you have with people, and trying to get to know them. Oftentimes I'm having to do it, yes, in a much smaller period of time. So it's, again, sometimes I nail it, and sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, I wish I could have connected a little more with them. But it just, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's almost 9 o'clock, so we really put these speakers through but we really gave them shared a whole bunch of questions, and they did a great job responding. And we really appreciate your sharing your insights. I know all the students here tonight, both Emily and Tim, I know they really appreciate how you're sharing advice, professional advice, as well as some of the concerns that you have to deal with as you're working. And like I said, we will be posting this recording, so students who weren't able to attend this evening and from the other classes can also listen in and learn a little bit more about what you're working on, and all the different things that you need to think about when you're pursuing a creative career, which is full of challenges. And but I guess at the end of the day, social media can be your friend.
Don't run from it. Don't run from it.
It's really nice when your feed is filled with artists. So
yeah.
But so many are afraid of it, and it's you don't need to be afraid of it. It's a wonderful tool if you use it properly.
Look out your crazy uncle and just stick with the artists.
There you go. There you go. Well, cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight, all the attendees, and thank you, Emily and Tim, again for your generosity and sharing your insights. Because I know that I found it really interesting to learn more about your working process, and I think really appreciate your answering a number of the students' questions.
Well, Carolyn and Brian, thank you for your hard work and supporting us and helping us get it out there, even during these crazy times.
Yeah, it is crazy.
Everyone, thank you for your questions. They were really great questions. I was like, they were great. So thank you for those thoughtful questions.
Yes, I certainly appreciate the participation. And Marilyn, I mean, I could thank her a million times, but she gave me the gift of this work. So thank you so much. It's a beautiful thing. And I think about you all the time in this work because I know that I wouldn't have it if it weren't for you bringing that idea up to me first off the bat. So thank you so much to you. And Brian, thanks for putting up the work in gallery. I'm glad you get to see it. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, and so we also thank Christy for helping us, Brian,
Thank
Greg,
you, Christy.
and the Dean and Associate Dean Michelle Hanlon for their continued support, sponsoring this series, and allowing us to install this show despite everything. And so the show will be up through December 12th. And so we hope that some more students will be able to visit the gallery. So, and the exhibiting artists. So I think that's going to be it for tonight. We're, like I said, we're really honored to be able to celebrate the accomplishments of our alumni, and especially Emily and Tim. We're really proud of all the great things that you're doing, and we want you to keep going. So, all right. So we're going to sign off.
Well, thank you.
And we hope to see you guys in the big lights, or continuing in the big lights. We'll see you guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.